So what exactly is an upsert? Well, the word upsert is a combination of update and insert. And upserts are a pretty common operation you might want to perform on a SQL database. To illustrate how they work, imagine we have this table of users, and the primary key for this table is the ID column. Now imagine we want to add some information about a user. If the table is large, we might not know whether that user already exists. So rather than having to look that up, we can do what's called an upsert. An upsert takes the values that are being added to the table and looks at one specific value, often the primary key. In this case, we'll use the user ID. If the user ID already exists in the table, an upsert will update that row with the new information. If the user ID doesn't exist in the table, an upsert will insert a new row with the new information. In other words, an upsert says to the database, here's some new information. If this value already exists in the database, then add all of this information to the row that has that value. If this value doesn't already exist in the database, then just add all this information as a new row. Here, for example, we're upserting a row with an employee ID of 2. Since that ID already exists in our table, the table information for that row will be updated. Here, we're upserting a row with an employee ID of 3. That ID doesn't exist in our table already, so a new row will be added to the table. Upserts are a really common operation, and up until now we've shown how they can be performed using CockroachDB, which is a next-generation distributed SQL database. As you can see, in CockroachDB there's an actual upsert command. But actually most traditional relational databases don't have an upsert command. That can make things a little trickier, so let's take a look at how to do upserts in a couple of other common types of databases. In MySQL databases, there is no upsert command. Instead, we have to run an insert statement with instructions at the end to specify what the database should do if it encounters a duplicate key. In other words, if the primary key value already exists in the database. In a Postgres database, we also have to use an insert command, but here we'll append that command with onConflict, followed by a target, which in our example is the ID column, and then an instruction to update the row if a conflict is encountered. In other words, if the ID column value in the row that we're inserting already exists in the database. Interestingly, that same Postgres syntax actually works in CockroachDB as well. So if you're using CockroachDB, like for example if you're using a free CockroachDB serverless cluster for your database, you can actually choose whether you want to use the upsert command or insert onConflict. And there are actually good reasons that you might want to choose one or the other depending on the situation. In a nutshell, the difference comes down to performance. Upsert writes directly to the table without having to read first, making it faster. But it only works if the value you're checking for in the table, ID in our example, is the primary key column. If you want an upsert to look for conflicts that aren't in the primary key column, you have to use insert onConflict. That's one of the cool things about CockroachDB. It's full of thoughtful additions to the traditional relational database like that one that make it easier for you to work faster and give you more fine-grained control over how the database carries out your queries so that you can optimize performance. But no matter what database you use, I hope this video has at least helped explain a little bit about what upserts are and how to use them. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the link in the video description below for an even deeper dive into upserts in SQL.